Welcome to another deep dive into the world of energy. Um, let's say you're prepping for a big meeting and you need to sound like you really know what's happening with oil and gas, but you don't exactly have time to read a whole stack of reports. Sound familiar?
I think we've all been there.
Right. Well, that's what we're here for. Today, we're going to be diving into today's oil and gas trends report, focusing on things like market dynamics, what's developing in the industry, and the regulatory side of things, too. Oh, and we'll even touch on stuff like methane detection technology. And of course, we have to look at the global energy outlook.
Lots to cover.
Always is. One thing that really jumped out at me when I was looking at this report, oil and gas are projected to bring in, get this, a massive $4.2 trillion globally this year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's massive. Yet, and here's the thing, we're also about to hit peak fossil fuel use by 2030. So that signals a huge EE
Ugh.
shift, and we're going to break down what it means for you.
Yeah, and it's not just about hitting peak usage, right? It's the speed of change in the whole sector.
Totally.
That's what's really fascinating.
It is. It is. So let's start with the state of the industry right now. The oil and gas industry has definitely proven itself to be resilient, bouncing back from that 2014 downturn. Oil prices are up, capital expenditures growing. We're seeing major projects in development.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The industry's adapted. It's recovered to a great extent. But this recovery is happening against a backdrop of energy transition. And that brings a whole other layer of pressure, sustainability pressure into the mix. It's not business as usual.
It's not, no. One of the things I thought was interesting in the report, 73, that's how many major oil and gas projects are currently under development globally, which is a 30% increase since the beginning of the decade. But here's the thing, it's still 32% lower than it was back in 2014. That's according to Goldman Sachs research. So, it really shows how the 2014 downturn, it's still having an impact.
Yeah, that's a key point. The industry is still trying to find its footing as it navigates this new reality, this new landscape.
It really is. Okay, let's talk tech for a minute. Seems like the digital revolution is in full swing. In the oil and gas world, companies are going all in on things like AI, IoT, big data to increase efficiency, boost safety, and of course, cut costs.
Exactly. And those technologies, they're capable of some incredible things. AI can actually now predict equipment failures before they even happen. Think about that. Minimizing downtime, saving companies a ton of money. And we're also seeing real-time asset monitoring thanks to IoT sensors, giving companies a much clearer picture of their operations.
So no more flying blind, basically. It's like having a constant pulse on the health of their equipment. But what's really interesting to me is this tech adoption's happening alongside a growing focus on decarbonization. Even the giants, ExxonMobil, Chevron, they're making acquisitions in the sustainability sector, setting net zero targets.
It's definitely a significant development. The Permian Basin's becoming a key area to watch in this whole decarbonization push. Yeah. As companies are, they're realizing they need to adapt to a changing world.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears and talk about India for a minute. Over there, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, or ONGC, they're partnering with the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO. And what they're doing, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
They're actually developing this system of satellites to detect methane leaks, in real time. And methane's a major contributor to climate change.
Huge. And this project, it's massive, with ambitious targets, too. Reduce methane emissions by 50% by 2027, and then 80% by 2030. It's bold.
It is bold, but the potential impact of this kind of technology, it's huge, right? It can completely revolutionize leak detection and how we respond to leaks, especially in those hard-to-reach areas. Think about the environmental impact. That's where it gets really exciting.
It does. Speaking of global efforts to reduce emissions, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, their 2023 World Energy Outlook, well, it made a pretty significant projection. They're saying all fossil fuels, they're expected to hit peak demand before 2030.
It's a turning point for sure. But it doesn't mean fossil fuels are just going to vanish overnight, right? The IEA stated policies scenario, or STEP S, they're still estimating that fossil fuels will make up something like 73% of global energy supply by 2030. So down from about 80% where it is now. But the trend's clear. We're moving away from fossil fuels. And that shift, it's speeding up.
Yeah. But the IEA also issued a warning. They're saying if the demand for fossil fuels stays high, reaching our climate goals is going to be a challenge.
Well, a big challenge. And one crucial factor to watch, China. The IEA is pointing to China's economic growth as a potential game changer. If China's growth slows down, it could really significantly reduce coal demand globally. And that would have ripple effects on oil and LNG imports, too, worldwide.
Right. So what we're looking at is this really complex interplay of factors, all influencing the future of energy. Now let's turn our attention to the regulatory landscape, because the rules of the game are changing.
They are changing. Governments around the world, they're tightening regulations around environmental protection, emissions reduction, and the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
They're feeling the pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot for the industry to juggle right now. Lots of pressure. But do you think, I mean, within all this disruption, are there also opportunities?
That's a good question. I mean, for the industry, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think this period of change, it's kind of creating fertile ground for innovation. And, for companies to reposition themselves strategically, I mean, the companies that can really adapt to these new realities, they're the ones that are going to come out on top.
I agree. It's not just about weathering the storm. It's about emerging stronger, more sustainable on the other side.
Exactly. And we're seeing companies taking steps. They're making investments in research and development,
Yeah.
exploring new tech, forming partnerships, to position themselves for a future where fossil fuels, they're just not going to play such a big role.
It's a huge transformation.
Hmm.
I'm curious, what do you see as some of the big trends driving this evolution in the energy sector? Well, one of the most prominent trends has to be the digitalization. It's sweeping through the whole industry,
Yeah.
impacting everything, from exploration and production to refining, distribution.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what's driving this digital transformation specifically?
Sure. It's really a convergence of some pretty powerful technologies. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, big data analytics. And these technologies, they're giving companies the ability to operate more efficiently, reduce those costs, improve safety, and of course, minimize that environmental impact.
It's a pretty wide range of applications. Do you have any specific examples of how these technologies are actually being used
Yeah.
out in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. One really cool example is something called AI-powered predictive maintenance. So it's basically helping companies anticipate equipment failures before they happen. So imagine an AI system. It's analyzing sensor data from an oil rig, and it can predict when a critical component's likely to fail.
Oh,
Right, so it allows for proactive maintenance, minimizing downtime, preventing those costly disruptions.
incredibly efficient.
Very. Another great example is using IoT sensors to monitor pipeline integrity. So you can actually detect leaks in real time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So these sensors, they're providing a constant stream of data, enabling operators to, quickly identify and address potential issues.
So it reduces the risk of environmental damage too. That's great.
Exactly, exactly. So it's all about, using technology to become more proactive,
Right.
more responsive.
Makes sense. But it's not just about optimizing what they're already doing.
Right.
Digitalization is also playing a role in developing completely new energy sources.
No, absolutely. Companies are using these digital tools to accelerate the deployment of renewables, like solar and wind power. For example, they're using really sophisticated modeling tools to optimize where they place wind turbines and solar panels so they can capture the maximum amount of energy
Yeah.
and, efficiently integrate that energy with the power grid.
It sounds like these digital tools are really key to, building a more sustainable future for energy.
They are. They are. Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about another big trend we touched on a little bit earlier, decarbonization. It seems like everyone's pushing to reduce those emissions, even, the big oil and gas companies.
Yeah, there's definitely a collective push happening. And it's being driven by a few things. You've got growing public awareness of climate change, increasing regulatory pressure, of course, and also the cost of renewable energy technologies. Well, that's declining. So companies are starting to realize they can't just ignore the environmental impact of their operations. I mean, they're facing scrutiny from everywhere. Investors, consumers, governments, everybody's demanding a cleaner, more sustainable energy future.
So a lot of pressure to prioritize sustainability. How are companies responding to all of this?
Many are actually stepping up to the challenge. They're setting really ambitious emissions reduction targets. They're investing in renewable energy projects. And they're exploring these new technologies like carbon capture and storage. They're also experimenting with things like alternative fuels, like hydrogen, which could really help to decarbonize heavy industries, like transportation and manufacturing.
It sounds like a real shift toward cleaner energy. Are there any, really standout examples of companies making big strides in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Some companies are taking advantage of their existing expertise, in geology and engineering, to develop geothermal energy projects Basically, they're tapping into the Earth's internal heat to generate clean electricity.
That's pretty cool. Utilizing their existing expertise to, explore new energy sources.
Mm.
But realistically, this whole decarbonization thing, it's not without its challenges, right?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, decarbonizing an entire sector as big and complex as oil and gas, that's a huge undertaking and needs tons of investment, technological breakthroughs, and, just a fundamental shift in how we think about things. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be roadblocks. But the end goal, that's clear. We need a sustainable energy future that works for the planet and the people on it.
It's a journey we need to take, even if there are bumps along the way. So we've talked about the digital revolution and the push for decarbonization. What other big pieces of the puzzle do we need to look at?
Well, one that's really crucial, and that we touched on earlier, the regulatory landscape. It's something that's constantly evolving, and it has huge implications for the industry.
That's true. Governments really play a key role in, shaping the energy landscape and how it all plays out. Yeah, it's a really complex landscape. So let's dive into that regulatory side of things. Governments are taking a more active role, right? Shaping the future of energy.
Oh, absolutely. And the regulatory landscape is changing so fast, it's really having a huge impact on how the oil and gas industry operates. Governments around the world, they're stepping up their game, trying to combat climate change, trying to transition to cleaner energy sources. And the oil and gas sector, it's feeling that pressure.
Definitely. Feels like the rules of the game are constantly changing.
Right.
One area that's getting a lot of attention lately is methane emissions. It's like this invisible gas, methane. It's become this prime target in the fight against climate change.
Yeah, and for good reason. Methane, it's a potent greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
Much more so than carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
In terms of warming potential. So reducing those methane emissions, well, it's crucial if we're going to hit those ambitious climate goals that everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
And regulators, they're taking it very seriously.
It seems like it. For example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they've rolled out these stricter regulations targeting methane leaks, specifically from oil and gas operations. Companies have to adopt those advanced detection and reduction technologies, or they're going to be facing some hefty fines.
And it's not just about patching up a few leaks here and there. The EPA regulations, they're actually designed to kind of push companies to implement these whole methane mitigation programs. So we're talking routine inspections, leak detection, equipment upgrades, operational improvements, the holistic approach to reducing those methane emissions.
So it's a whole shift in how companies manage methane from start to finish. But this isn't just a U.S. thing, is it? It feels like a global trend.
Oh, it definitely is. We're seeing methane regulations popping up all over the world. The European Union's working on their own set of rules, focusing on both, domestic production and imports. And even big oil and gas producers like Canada, Nigeria, they're also stepping up their efforts to cut those methane emissions.
So a real international push to get a handle on methane. But regulating methane, it's just one part of it, right? What other regulatory trends are we seeing out there?
Well, governments are also rolling out these broader policies to try and speed up this whole transition to a cleaner energy future. A good example, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. That was huge. It included a ton of incentives for clean energy development, tax credits for renewable energy projects, funding for carbon capture and storage, stuff like that.
It really does seem like the U.S. is, putting their money where their mouth is. In terms of supporting clean energy, are other countries doing similar things?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The European Union, they've got their own plan. The European Net Zero Industry Act, it's a pretty ambitious plan, actually. The goal is to create an environment where clean technology manufacturing can really thrive within the EU, so they're not so reliant on imports. And they can really expand those green industries. It's all about, making Europe more competitive in that global clean energy race.
Right. So it's competitive, but there's also collaboration as everyone tries to become the leader in this clean energy transition. But all this, regulatory activity, it's making things pretty complex for the oil and gas industry, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a tricky situation. Companies are dealing with these stricter environmental regulations. And at the same time, they're having to adapt to a world where, well, fossil fuels are gradually being phased out. It's a balancing act, for sure.
A tough one. So where does this all leave us? I mean, what does it mean for companies operating in this space, in the oil and gas sector?
Well, the companies that can really embrace innovation, adapt to those new regulations, and position themselves as, the leaders in this clean energy transition, they're going to have the edge. It's a chance for them to kind of reinvent themselves, attract new investors, and secure their place in that sustainable energy future.
So, yeah, challenges, but also big opportunities for those that are willing to evolve. It seems like the big takeaway from this deep dive into oil and gas change is going to happen. It's inevitable.
Yeah. The industry's at a crossroads. We're facing peak fossil fuel demand. We've got these rapid advancements in technology, and regulations are changing all the time. It's complex, for sure, but it's exciting, too. I think there's a lot of potential for the companies willing to step up and, innovate.
Well, we've covered a lot today: market dynamics, technology, the global push for decarbonization, all those regulatory changes. The energy industry is going through this huge transformation, and it's fascinating to see how it's all unfolding.
It is a fascinating time to be in the energy sector,
Yeah.
and the decisions being made now, well, those are going to impact our planet's future for a long time.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the future of oil and gas. Hope you found it insightful.